Welcome to this IFRS Advisory Council podcast. My name is Matt Tilling and I'm the Director of Education at the IFRS Foundation. I'm joined today by the Chair of the IFRS Advisory Council, Joanna Perry. This is the first podcast that we are going to produce after a meeting of the IFRS Advisory Council. The purpose of this is to provide a summary of the meeting and the key discussions. The Advisory Council meets twice a year, and its latest meeting took place in London on the 26th and 27th of February 2018. Joanna, can you start by telling me a bit about the role of the Advisory Council?
Yes, Matt. The role of the Council is really very simple. It acts as a sounding board for the Foundation, including the board, to provide them with strategic advice. And that ranges from the board's technical agenda to the impact of technology on the future of financial reporting or the consideration of the Foundation's strategy for conferences.
And how does the Advisory Council actually work?
The actual mechanics of the Council are that it meets twice a year in London. It has an agenda that's been considered really carefully to cover topical areas where strategic advice is sought by the Foundation or the board. It then receives papers in advance prepared by the Foundation staff. We at the Council then discuss those items and provide advice. And I will say sometimes that advice is unanimous. However, more often there's a range of advice for the Foundation to consider. However, that's a good thing.
Can you tell me a little bit about who is on the Advisory Council?
Yes, it's made up of around 50 individuals who are diverse both from a geographic and experience perspective. The 50 individuals include, for example, investors, preparers, standard setters, regulators, and academics. And each individual is a senior person backed by an organisation. The current organisations that are represented around the table include, for example, Shanghai University of Finance and Economics, the CFA Institute, the Capital Markets Board of Turkey, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, the Securities Analysts Association of Japan, as well as the IMF, IOSCO and the World Bank. And most importantly, not everyone is an accountant. So you can see it's a pretty diverse group.
And Joanna, can you tell me a little bit about how you ended up chairing this committee?
Matt, that's a long story. However, to cut it short, the trustees of the IFRS Foundation asked me to. I have a long history with standard setting and working with the ISB. I was a partner with KPMG in New Zealand for 17 years, and for the past 10 years I've been a non-executive director on a number of boards, including listed, private and state-owned companies. I think the trustees saw that my current non-executive director roles, combined with my past involvement with standard setting, would enable me to facilitate the strategic discussion around the Advisory Council table.
Each meeting is obviously very different in terms of what it covers.
Yes, as I said, the agenda is carefully considered to ensure that what we're covering are strategic matters that are of topical interest to the Foundation as a whole. It just so happened that for this meeting, a lot of the matters that were of topical interest were in the areas of strategies around some core activities of the Foundation.
So what were the topics discussed during this meeting? And I'm interested to know which topics really engaged the Council members the most, do you think?
The main topics that were discussed this time in that area of core activities of the Foundation were around the strategy and effectiveness of the effects analysis process and the strategies around conferences, academic liaison and social media. And I think, to be honest, that the Council members were engaged in all of the topics. The one, though, I believe that they probably had the most fun on, judging by the social media activity since the session, was the social media discussion.
There were also several breakout sessions to discuss some of these topics in much more detail. Can you talk us through these?
Yes, we split our time between holding discussions around a big table with 50 people plus around it, and in 4 smaller groups, the so-called breakout sessions. In the smaller groups, as you can imagine, it's possible to engage much more deeply on the topic. And we usually within our meetings have 2 or 3 of those sessions, in fact. This time, all of the topics I mentioned before, apart from social media, were discussed in the smaller groups. So the effects analysis, conferences, and academic liaison.
And in fact, I presented one of the topics that was discussed in the breakout sessions at this meeting around conference strategy. And I think the Advisory Council was able to give us some really good advice in this area.
Well, I'm glad you think so, Matt, because I thought so too. Yes, there were many rich individual observations during the discussion. However, I think the concluding high-level advice from the Council as a whole was that while conferences may play a role in achieving the Foundation's objectives, any strategy should first be developed in considering the specific objective. For example, obviously taking into account the resources available, to consider what is the best strategy for networking with stakeholders in a certain jurisdiction. And it may not be a conference. Or what is the best strategy for educating about IFRS 17 globally? It may be a conference or conferences. However, maybe it would be a webinar.
So having received this advice, how does the IFRS Foundation and the board take it on board?
At the end of the meeting, I prepare a summary report of the meeting that is addressed to the board and the trustees, and that is posted to the Foundation website. In addition, of course, the staff have detailed notes of the discussion that they use in considering the advice and then their proposals further. The staff also refer to the webcast of the full meeting. That too is posted on the Foundation's public website. At our next meeting, the Council will receive a report that details how our advice has been followed up. I do emphasise, though, we are only an advisory body. However, I'm also delighted to report that both the board and the trustees consistently seem to heed our advice.
Well, thank you, Joanna, for that overview. A more detailed summary of the meeting will become available on the IFRS Foundation's website. A recording of the entire meeting is also available for anybody who would like to listen to the discussion in more detail. If you have any questions or feedback, please email communications@ifrs.org. As always, we would like to thank our listeners and Joanna, and I look forward to talking to you again in September. Thank you very much.